I discovered my brother sold my waterfront home for $780,000 while I was recovering from surgery. The betrayal hit harder than any physical pain I had endured. 20 years of trust shattered in a single phone call from a confused real estate agent asking about deed discrepancies. My own flesh and blood had forged documents, manipulated my vulnerability, and stolen my sanctuary. But what he did not know was that I had kept one crucial secret that would unravel his entire scheme and expose the depths of his deception. Call to action. Before we dive into this family betrayal that will leave you questioning everything you think you know about blood loyalty, I want to hear from you. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and smash that like button because this story of family revenge is going to take some unexpected turns. Make sure to hit subscribe and ring that notification bell because you will not want to miss how this twisted tale of greed and deception unfolds. Trust me, the justice served at the end will leave you speechless. My name is Serafina, and I had always believed family meant everything. Growing up in coastal Maine, my brother Marcus and I were inseparable. We built sandcastles on the private beach behind our grandmother's waterfront cottage, caught fireflies in mason jars during humid summer evenings, and promised each other we would always protect what mattered most. That cottage, perched on 3 acres of pristine shoreline, became my inheritance when grandmother Evelyn passed 5 years ago. Marcus had been furious about the will. He expected us to split everything equally, but grandmother had been crystal clear in her final months. She pulled me aside during her last Christmas and whispered with trembling hands, "Serafina, this land has been in our family for 4 generations. You understand its soul. Marcus sees only dollar signs." She was right. While I treasured every weathered shingle and creaky floorboard, Marcus constantly pressured me to sell spouting market values and development potential. The surgery that changed everything was supposed to be routine, a gallbladder removal that somehow led to complications, infections, and 3 weeks in the hospital, followed by 2 months of home recovery. Marcus had been surprisingly attentive during this period, visiting daily, bringing groceries, handling my mail. I was touched by his newfound devotion, grateful that near-death experiences sometimes brought families closer together. That Tuesday morning in October, I was finally strong enough to drive to the cottage for the first time since my surgery. The fall foliage painted the coastal road in brilliant oranges and reds, and I felt my spirit lifting as I anticipated walking my private beach again. But when I turned into the familiar gravel driveway, a massive construction sign dominated the front yard. Future site of Ocean View Luxury Condominiums, Morrison Development Group. My hands shook as I parked and stared at the sign in disbelief. A crew of workers was measuring the property boundaries, and heavy machinery sat ominously near my grandmother's prize-winning rose garden. I stumbled out of the car, my surgical incisions still tender, and approached the foreman. "Excuse me, there has been some mistake," I said, my voice barely steady. "This is private property. You cannot be here." The foreman, a weathered man with kind eyes, looked genuinely confused. "Ma'am, we have permits and ownership documents. This property was sold to Morrison Development 3 weeks ago. Are you the previous owner?" Previous owner. The words hit me like a physical blow. I fumbled for my phone and called Marcus immediately. His phone went straight to voicemail. Then I called the real estate office, whose sign was planted next to the construction notice. "Coastal Properties, this is Jennifer speaking." "This is Serafina Blackwood. I need to speak with someone about the sale of my property on Lighthouse Road immediately." A pause. "Oh, Miss Blackwood. Yes, we have been trying to reach you. There seems to be some confusion with the title search. Could you come in today?" The next 3 hours at the real estate office revealed the scope of Marcus's betrayal. He had somehow convinced the buyers and their agent that he was the sole inheritor of the property. Using forged documents and what appeared to be a fabricated death certificate, claiming I had died during surgery, he had executed the sale while I lay unconscious in the intensive care unit. Jennifer, the agent, spread the paperwork across her desk with trembling hands. I am so sorry, Miss Blackwood. Your brother presented what appeared to be legitimate documentation. He seemed genuinely grief-stricken about your passing. He said he needed to sell quickly to pay medical debts from your treatment. The cruelest part was how convincing Marcus had been. He had cried real tears while signing my death away, telling elaborate stories about my final wishes to sell the property and donate proceeds to medical research. He had pocketed $780,000 while I fought for my life, believing I would never wake up to discover his theft. But Marcus had made one critical error in his elaborate fraud. In his greed and haste, he had overlooked one crucial detail that would become his downfall. When Grandmother Evelyn left me the cottage, she had also quietly transferred ownership of the mineral rights and underwater land, extending 200 feet into the bay. This separate deed, filed in a different county courthouse, had never been mentioned to Marcus. It meant that regardless of any forged documents, no legitimate sale could occur without my signature on both property deeds. As Jennifer pulled up the official records on her computer, her face went pale. Miss Blackwood, according to the state database, you are still listed as the sole legal owner of both the surface property and subsurface rights. This sale is completely invalid. My shock began transforming into something sharper, more focused. Marcus had not just stolen my inheritance, he had orchestrated an elaborate fraud that implicated multiple parties. The buyers, Morrison Development, had already begun construction based on falsified ownership documents. They would be furious when they discovered the truth. The title insurance company would face massive liability. And Marcus had just committed multiple felonies while believing his sister was too dead to stop him. Standing in that real estate office surrounded by the evidence of my brother's ultimate betrayal, I felt something cold and calculating settle into my chest. This was not just about recovering my property anymore. This was about exposing the true depth of his character and ensuring he faced consequences for treating my life, my death, and my legacy as nothing more than a payday opportunity. The cottage meant everything to me, but what Marcus had revealed about himself meant he had forfeited any claim to family loyalty. Blood might be thicker than water, but fraud was thicker than blood. And I was very much alive to prove it. The next morning, I sat in attorney Sarah Kellerman's office, watching her face cycle through disbelief, anger, and professional determination as she reviewed the fraudulent documents Marcus had used to sell my cottage. Sarah had handled Grandmother Evelyn's estate, so she knew every detail of the legitimate ownership transfer. Her expertise in real estate fraud would become my greatest weapon. Serafina, this is one of the most brazen cases of identity fraud and property theft I have encountered, Sarah said, adjusting her reading glasses. Your brother did not just forge a few signatures. He created an entire false narrative complete with fabricated medical records, death certificates, and inheritance documents. This required planning research and multiple accomplices. The accomplices part stunned me. Marcus could not have pulled this off alone. Someone had helped him forge official documents. Someone with access to medical records had provided false information about my condition, and someone in the real estate industry had facilitated the fraudulent sale without proper verification procedures. Sarah's investigation over the next week uncovered a web of corruption that extended far beyond my brother's greed. Dr. Richard Pemberton, Marcus's college roommate who now worked in hospital administration, had provided insider information about my surgery complications and recovery timeline. He had even supplied hospital letterhead and official-looking documents declaring my death. Linda Morrison, the real estate agent who processed the sale, had deliberately skipped standard verification procedures in exchange for a larger commission from the quick sale. But the most shocking revelation came when Sarah discovered Marcus had been planning this theft for over 2 years. Phone records showed regular communication between him and Dr. Kata Pemberton dating back to when my grandmother first became ill. Text messages revealed discussions about waiting for the right opportunity and ensuring clean inheritance transfer. Marcus had been hoping for my grandmother's death and actively planning to steal my inheritance before she even passed away. The smoking gun came from Marcus's own arrogance. In his confidence that I would never survive to challenge him, he had documented everything. His laptop, which Sarah's private investigator accessed through legal channels, contained detailed spreadsheets calculating property values, development potential, and profit projections. Email chains showed him researching forged document techniques and discussing timing with his conspirators. Most damning was a voice recording he had made on his phone, apparently practicing his grief-stricken performance for the real estate closing. In it, Marcus rehearsed fake tears while saying, "My poor sister would have wanted this. She always said the cottage was too much responsibility. Selling it honors her memory." Hearing my own brother practice fake mourning over my fabricated death while planning to profit from it crystallized something permanent in my heart. Sarah filed criminal charges with the state prosecutor's office on a Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, arrest warrants had been issued for Marcus Dr. Pemberton and Linda Morrison on charges including identity theft, fraud, conspiracy, and falsification of official documents. The prosecutor, District Attorney Michael Torres, was particularly interested because the case involved multiple felonies crossing state lines and federal fraud statutes. But I wanted more than legal justice. I wanted public exposure that would ensure Marcus could never again manipulate family trust or exploit vulnerable situations. The local news media became fascinated by the story of a woman rising from her alleged death to expose her brother's fraud. Channel 8 investigative reporter Jessica Chen interviewed me in front of the cottage where construction equipment still sat abandoned after Morrison Development halted all work upon learning about the invalid sale. The interview aired on the evening news with the headline, "Local Woman Discovers Brother Sold Her Home While She Recovered from Surgery Using Fake Death Certificate." The story went viral on social media within hours. Comments poured in expressing outrage at Marcus's betrayal and admiration for my determination to fight back. The story was picked up by regional newspapers and true crime podcasts, turning Marcus's fraud into a cautionary tale about family greed. Marcus's reaction to the public exposure was swift and predictable. He hired expensive criminal defense attorney Robert Kane and began a counter-narrative campaign claiming I was mentally unstable from surgery medications and fabricating the entire situation out of spite over grandmother's will. He told anyone who would listen that his sister had become delusional and vindictive, that he was the real victim of false accusations. The defense strategy backfired spectacularly when Sarah released the audio recording of Marcus practicing his fake grief. Local radio stations played clips repeatedly, and social media users created reaction videos mocking his rehearsed performance. His attempt to portray himself as a caring brother was demolished by his own voice coldly calculating profits from my supposed death. But Marcus had one more card to play, and it involved someone I had trusted almost as much as I had once trusted him. On a rainy Tuesday evening, I received a call that would test my resolve and threaten everything I had fought to reclaim. "Serafina, this is Detective Raymond Walsh with the State Police. We need to discuss some new developments in your case. Someone has come forward claiming you fabricated evidence against your brother, and they have documentation that could significantly impact the charges." My blood ran cold. Who could possibly have documentation contradicting the overwhelming evidence of Marcus's fraud? Every piece of evidence had been verified through official channels, every document authenticated by forensics experts. But as I would soon learn, when family loyalties run deep and money stakes run high, even the most solid foundation can develop unexpected cracks. Someone close to me had been feeding information to Marcus's defense team, someone with intimate knowledge of my case strategy and access to details that should have remained confidential. The betrayal within my support network would prove almost as devastating as Marcus's original theft, and it would force me to question everything I thought I knew about loyalty, trust, and the price of seeking justice against family. The game was about to become much more complicated, and the stakes were about to get much higher. Detective Walsh's words hung in the air like a death sentence as I gripped my phone with trembling fingers. Someone had turned against me, someone with insider knowledge who could potentially destroy my entire case. The thought of Marcus escaping justice because of another betrayal made my chest tighten with rage and desperation. Detective Walsh, who exactly has come forward with these allegations? I managed to ask, though my voice sounded hollow even to my own ears. I cannot discuss specifics over the phone, Miss Blackwood. Can you come to the station tomorrow morning at 9 and please bring your attorney? That night, I barely slept. My mind raced through everyone who had access to case details, everyone I had trusted with intimate knowledge of my legal strategy. Sarah had been meticulous about confidentiality, but several people had been involved in building our evidence: the private investigator, the forensics expert who authenticated documents, the hospital administrators who verified my medical records, and even my cousin Rebecca, who had been my emotional support throughout this nightmare. The next morning, Sarah and I sat across from Detective Walsh in a sterile conference room at the State Police Barracks. Walsh was a seasoned investigator with gray temples and tired eyes who had seen enough family destruction to recognize the warning signs of a case about to implode. Miss Blackwood, someone claiming to be a family friend, has provided statements suggesting you may have fabricated or exaggerated certain aspects of your brother's alleged fraud. They claim you had prior knowledge of the property sale and that your reaction was performance for financial gain through a wrongful death lawsuit. Sarah's professional composure cracked slightly. Detective, that is absolutely ridiculous. We have documented evidence spanning 2 years showing the defendant's premeditation and conspiracy. What possible documentation could contradict that? Walsh slid a manila folder across the table. Inside were photocopied pages of what appeared to be text message conversations between me and Marcus dated during my hospital stay, discussing the property sale in terms that suggested mutual agreement and shared planning. The messages made it appear I had been conscious and collaborative during the entire process. My heart stopped. The messages were expertly crafted fakes, but they used intimate details about my recovery, private jokes between Marcus and me, and specific medical information that only someone very close to both of us could have known. Worse, they were time-stamped during periods when I had been heavily sedated and completely unconscious. These are fabricated, I said, my voice stronger than I felt. I can prove I was unconscious during every timestamp on these conversations. Hospital records will show my sedation levels, and phone records will prove my device was inactive. But even as I spoke, I realized the devastating effectiveness of this counterattack. While we could eventually prove the messages were fake, the mere existence of seemingly credible evidence suggesting my complicity would create reasonable doubt. Marcus's expensive attorney had clearly crafted a sophisticated defense strategy designed to muddy the waters enough to escape conviction. Sarah was already making notes, her legal mind working through the implications. Detective Walsh, who provided these alleged text messages, we need to know the chain of custody and the source's relationship to both parties. The source wishes to remain anonymous for now, but claims to be someone who was helping care for Miss Blackwood during her recovery and witnessed these conversations firsthand. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow. Someone who had been in my home during my most vulnerable period, someone I had trusted with my recovery and my pain, had been gathering information to use against me. The intimate details in the fake messages could only have come from someone who knew my relationship with Marcus, my medical condition, and the specific timeline of my recovery. Walking to the parking lot after the meeting, Sarah and I began strategizing our response. We needed to identify who had turned against me, gather irrefutable proof of the fabricated messages, and strengthen our evidence before Marcus's defense team could create more doubt. Serafina, I want you to think carefully about everyone who had access to your home, your phone, your medical information during your recovery, Sarah said. Someone has been planning this counterattack for weeks, maybe months. That evening, I called an emergency meeting with the people I trusted most. My cousin Rebecca, my neighbor Mrs. Patterson, who had helped with groceries during recovery, and my childhood friend Amanda, who had taken time off work to care for me during the worst weeks. We gathered in my living room, the same space where I had been bedridden and vulnerable while Marcus orchestrated his theft. I explained the situation carefully, watching each face for telltale reactions. Rebecca looked genuinely shocked and immediately offered to help investigate. Mrs. Patterson seemed confused but determined to assist however possible. But Amanda's reaction was different. A fleeting expression of guilt before she composed herself and expressed appropriate outrage. My suspicions crystallized when I remembered Amanda asking detailed questions about my relationship with Marcus during my recovery questions that had seemed like concerned curiosity at the time, but now felt like intelligence gathering. She had been particularly interested in our childhood dynamics, our financial arrangements, and my feelings about the inheritance. I decided to test my theory. I am going to give each of you a different piece of information about our legal strategy and see which one appears in Marcus's defense. We need to identify the leak before it destroys our case. Over the next 3 days, I shared false information with each suspect. I told Rebecca we had discovered hidden assets Marcus had stolen. I told Mrs. Patterson we were planning to sue the hospital for privacy violations, and I told Amanda we had found evidence Marcus was planning to flee the country. The trap worked perfectly. Within 48 hours, Marcus's attorney filed a motion claiming I was pursuing frivolous lawsuits for financial gain and had been investigating his client's finances obsessively. The motion contained specific details I had only shared with Amanda, including fabricated account numbers and fictional evidence I had invented to test her loyalty. Confronting Amanda was one of the hardest conversations of my life. We met at the coffee shop where we used to study together in high school, surrounded by memories of genuine friendship that now felt tainted by her betrayal. Amanda, I know you have been feeding information to Marcus's defense team, I said without preamble. I need to know why. Her composure crumbled immediately, tears streaming down her face as she confessed. Marcus had contacted her shortly after the criminal charges were filed, offering her $50,000 to gather inside information about my case strategy. More damaging, he had convinced her I was mentally unstable from surgery medications and pursuing a vindictive campaign against innocent people. He showed me medical articles about post-surgical psychosis and convinced me you were having a breakdown, Amanda sobbed. He said he was trying to protect you from making decisions you would regret later. I thought I was helping both of you by preventing a family war. The manipulation was breathtaking in its sophistication. Marcus had identified my closest confidant, exploited her genuine concern for my well-being, and convinced her that betraying my trust was actually protecting my best interests. He had weaponized Amanda's loyalty and friendship against me. But Amanda's confession also provided something invaluable detailed information about Marcus's defense strategy, his financial resources, and his plans for escaping consequences. She had recorded their conversations out of growing unease with his requests, and those recordings would become crucial evidence of witness tampering and obstruction of justice. As devastating as Amanda's betrayal felt personally, it had actually strengthened our case legally. Marcus's attempts to manipulate witnesses and fabricate evidence demonstrated consciousness of guilt and added new criminal charges to his mounting legal problems. Standing in that coffee shop watching my childhood friend cry over her choices, I realized that seeking justice against family creates ripple effects that touch everyone in the circle of trust. But I also understood that some battles are worth the collateral damage, especially when the alternative is allowing cruelty and greed to triumph over truth and accountability. The war was far from over, but we now had intelligence about enemy tactics and new ammunition for the fight ahead. Amanda's recordings revealed that Marcus had been building a much larger conspiracy than any of us had imagined. As Sarah and I listened to the audio files in her office, the scope of his manipulation became terrifyingly clear. He had not just targeted Amanda for information gathering. He had been systematically approaching everyone in my support network, offering bribes, spreading lies about my mental state, and building a counter-narrative designed to destroy my credibility entirely. The most shocking revelation came in a conversation between Marcus and someone whose voice I recognized immediately, Dr. Patricia Vance, the surgeon who had performed my gallbladder operation. Marcus had somehow convinced her that I was exhibiting signs of post-surgical paranoia and delusional thinking. On the recording, Dr. Vance agreed to provide a medical opinion stating that my accusations against Marcus were likely the result of medication-induced psychosis. "This is a disaster," Sarah said, running her hands through her hair as we processed the implications. "If a respected surgeon testifies that you were mentally incapacitated during the relevant period, it could undermine everything we have built. Juries trust medical professionals implicitly. But the most devastating betrayal was yet to come." That afternoon, as Sarah and I prepared our response to these new threats, I received a call from my cousin Rebecca. Her voice was strange, formal, and distant in a way that immediately put me on edge. "Serafina, I need to tell you something important about our case. Can you meet me at the cottage tonight? There is evidence there you need to see." Something about her tone triggered alarm bells, but Rebecca had been my most trusted ally throughout this ordeal. She had helped research legal precedents, organized my medical records, and provided emotional support during the darkest moments. If Rebecca had discovered new evidence at the cottage, I needed to see it immediately. I arrived at the cottage just after sunset, the autumn air crisp and filled with the sound of waves against the rocks below. Rebecca's car was already in the driveway, and I could see lights on inside the house. As I approached the front door, I noticed it was slightly ajar, which seemed odd given the October chill. "Rebecca," I called out as I stepped inside. "Where are you?" "In the living room." Her voice came from the back of the house. But as I walked through the familiar rooms of my grandmother's cottage, I realized I was not alone with Rebecca. Marcus stepped out of the kitchen, his expression a mixture of smugness and something darker that made my blood run cold. "Hello, sister," he said with a smile that contained no warmth. "I think it is time we had an honest conversation about this situation." The setup became clear with horrible suddenness. Rebecca emerged from the living room, her face a mask of guilt and defiance. In her hands were several manila folders and what appeared to be legal documents. Behind her stood Marcus's attorney, Robert Kane, and two men I did not recognize, but whose professional demeanor suggested they were investigators or private security. "Rebecca, what is this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer was going to shatter another piece of my world. "I am sorry, Serafina," she said, but her tone carried no real remorse. "Marcus has shown me proof that you have been lying about everything. The surgery did cause brain damage. You have been having paranoid delusions about the property sale. Marcus was trying to protect you, and you have destroyed his reputation with false accusations." The manufactured evidence Rebecca held included falsified medical records showing brain injury from my surgery, fabricated psychiatric evaluations declaring me mentally incompetent, and forged documents suggesting I had signed over power of attorney to Marcus before the operation. The sophistication of the fraud was breathtaking, but what cut deeper was Rebecca's willingness to believe these lies over everything she had witnessed firsthand. Marcus stepped closer, his voice taking on the patronizing tone he had used when we were children, and he wanted to convince our parents I was lying about something. "Sarah, you have been sick. The surgery damaged parts of your brain that control memory and judgment. I sold the cottage to pay for specialized treatment you are going to need. Everything I did was to protect you." The gaslighting was so elaborate and persistent that for a moment I almost questioned my own reality. The medical documents looked authentic. The psychiatric reports contained convincing technical language, and Rebecca's betrayal seemed to confirm that I might indeed be delusional about everything that had happened. But then I remembered the audio recording of Marcus practicing his fake grief, the detailed spreadsheets of his profit calculations, and the 2-year timeline of his planning. Mental illness could not explain away documented evidence spanning years of premeditation. This was not delusion. This was an escalation of Marcus's fraud designed to make me question my own sanity. "You are lying," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "And I can prove it." Robert Kane stepped forward with a legal document. "Miss Blackwood, we are prepared to offer you a settlement. You drop all criminal charges against your brother, accept treatment for your condition, and we will ensure you receive appropriate care for the rest of your life." The offer was another manipulation tactic designed to make me appear mercenary if I refused. By framing continued prosecution as choosing money over family healing, they were trying to trap me in a narrative where seeking justice became evidence of my alleged instability. But Rebecca's betrayal had revealed something crucial about Marcus's strategy. He was so desperate to avoid criminal consequences that he was willing to destroy the reputation and mental health of everyone around him. The elaborate counter-conspiracy, involving medical professionals, family members, and legal experts, demonstrated that he knew exactly how guilty he was and how much he had to lose. Standing in my grandmother's living room surrounded by people who had turned against me, I realized that Marcus had made one critical error in his latest scheme. He had become so focused on discrediting me that he had forgotten about the evidence that existed independently of my testimony. Hospital security cameras, phone records, banking transactions, and witness statements created a timeline that no amount of manufactured psychiatric reports could explain away. "I will not be signing anything," I told the assembled group, "and I will not be intimidated into dropping charges against someone who committed multiple felonies while I was fighting for my life." Marcus's mask of concerned brotherhood slipped completely. "You always were a stubborn, self-righteous little girl. But this time your pride is going to cost you everything. When we are finished, no one will believe anything you say ever again." Walking out of that cottage, leaving behind Rebecca and the elaborate trap they had set, I understood that this war had escalated beyond property theft into something much more dangerous. Marcus was not just trying to escape consequences, he was trying to destroy my entire identity and credibility. But his desperation had also exposed the full extent of his corruption and the network of accomplices who had helped him. The battle was about to enter its final phase, and I was going to need allies more powerful than family connections to survive what came next. The morning after Rebecca's betrayal, I sat in Sarah's office feeling like my entire world had collapsed around me. The sophisticated nature of Marcus's counterattack had shaken even Sarah's professional confidence. We were no longer just fighting fraud. We were battling an organized conspiracy designed to destroy my sanity, credibility, and freedom. "Serafina, I need to be honest with you," Sarah said, her usually confident demeanor subdued. "The fabricated psychiatric reports and medical records they have produced are extremely convincing. Even though we know they are false, proving that in court, while your brother's team questions your mental competency, will be incredibly challenging." That was when my phone rang with a call that would change everything. The number was unfamiliar, but the voice on the other end belonged to someone I never expected to hear from again. "Miss Blackwood, this is FBI Special Agent Catherine Morrison. I believe you know my father, James Morrison, from Morrison Development Group. I need to speak with you about your brother's fraudulent property sale." Agent Morrison's involvement brought federal law enforcement into what had been a state-level criminal case. As it turned out, Morrison Development Group was already under FBI investigation for a pattern of fraudulent real estate acquisitions across New England. My cottage was just one of several properties they had purchased using forged documents and fabricated ownership claims. When we met the following day at the federal building in Portland, Agent Morrison revealed that the FBI had been building a case against the Morrison family's development empire for over a year. They had identified at least 12 instances where the company had purchased properties through fraudulent means, often targeting elderly owners or distressed families vulnerable to manipulation. "Your brother's case is particularly valuable to us because of the extensive documentation he created," Agent Morrison explained, spreading files across the conference table. "Most fraud cases rely on circumstantial evidence, but Marcus documented everything. His laptop contained detailed correspondence with our suspects, step-by-step fraud instructions, and even tutorial videos about document forgery. The federal investigation had uncovered evidence that completely independent of my testimony or mental state. Bank records showed suspicious payments from Morrison Development to Dr. Pemberton and Linda Morrison months before my surgery. Email servers had preserved communications between Marcus and his conspirators discussing timing and logistics. Cell phone tower records proved Marcus was at locations he had denied visiting during the fraud period. Most damaging of all, the FBI had been conducting surveillance on Morrison Development when Marcus's fraud occurred. They had audio and video recordings of meetings where the conspiracy was planned and executed. Federal agents had literally watched my brother commit his crimes in real time as part of their larger investigation. The beauty of your brother's case, Agent Morrison continued, is that it demonstrates clear intent and premeditation. He did not stumble into fraud. He researched techniques, recruited accomplices, and executed a sophisticated scheme. That level of planning makes this a federal racketeering case. The federal charges would be much more serious than the state fraud accusations. RICO violations carried 20-year prison sentences, and asset forfeiture laws would allow the government to seize everything Marcus had gained through his criminal enterprise. More importantly, federal prosecution meant that local manipulation tactics would be ineffective against experienced federal prosecutors. But Agent Morrison brought even better news about the counterattack Marcus had launched against my credibility. The FBI's forensics team had already analyzed the fabricated text messages, psychiatric reports, and medical records his defense team had produced. "Every single document your brother's team submitted is fraudulent," she said with satisfaction. "The text messages contain metadata errors that prove they were created weeks after the alleged conversations. The psychiatric reports were written by a fake doctor whose medical license was revoked years ago. Even the medical records showing brain damage contain impossible anatomical claims." The federal investigation had also uncovered evidence of witness tampering that went far beyond Amanda's confession. Marcus had attempted to bribe hospital staff, threatened medical professionals who refused to cooperate, and used intimidation tactics against potential witnesses. Each instance added additional federal charges to his mounting legal problems. Dr. Patricia Vance's involvement in providing false medical testimony had already resulted in her suspension from the hospital and referral to the state medical board. When confronted with evidence of her collaboration with Marcus, she had immediately confessed and agreed to cooperate with federal prosecutors in exchange for reduced charges. The most shocking revelation came when Agent Morrison showed me surveillance footage of Rebecca meeting with Marcus weeks before my surgery. The FBI had been watching Morrison Development's associates, and Rebecca had been photographed accepting cash payments from Marcus while I was still healthy and actively refusing to sell the cottage. "Your cousin was recruited as an inside source before you ever became ill," Agent Morrison explained. "She was reporting on your health, your legal arrangements, and your resistance to selling the property. Your brother knew about your surgery complications because Rebecca was feeding him real-time information from the hospital." The betrayal ran deeper than I had imagined. Rebecca had not been corrupted by Marcus's recent manipulation. She had been his accomplice from the beginning. Her expressions of concern during my recovery, her offers to help with legal research, her emotional support during my darkest moments, all of it had been performance designed to gather intelligence for Marcus's benefit. But Rebecca's long-term involvement also provided the FBI with additional evidence of conspiracy and racketeering. Phone records showed regular contact between Rebecca and Marcus, spanning months before my surgery. Financial records revealed payments disguised as family gifts. Text messages contained discussions about timing the fraud to coincide with periods when I would be most vulnerable. The federal case was so comprehensive that Marcus's elaborate defense strategy became irrelevant. His attempts to question my mental competency could not explain away FBI surveillance footage showing him committing crimes. His fabricated evidence only added perjury and obstruction charges to his existing problems. Agent Morrison scheduled a press conference for the following week to announce the federal indictments against Marcus, Rebecca, Dr. Pemberton, Linda Morrison, and several Morrison Development executives. The case would be presented as part of a broader crackdown on real estate fraud schemes targeting vulnerable property owners across New England. "Miss Blackwood, I want you to know that your courage in fighting back against your brother probably prevented him from victimizing other families," Agent Morrison said as our meeting concluded. The evidence you helped uncover will put these people in federal prison for a very long time. Driving home from the federal building, I felt something I had not experienced since discovering Marcus's betrayal. Genuine hope that justice would prevail. The federal investigation had transformed my personal family tragedy into part of a larger story about protecting vulnerable people from predatory criminals. Marcus had gambled everything on his ability to manipulate family loyalty and exploit my vulnerability. But his greed had led him into a federal investigation where emotional manipulation tactics were powerless against documented evidence and professional law enforcement. The final chapter of this story was about to begin, and this time I would not be fighting alone. The federal courthouse in Portland was packed with media and spectators on the morning Marcus and his conspirators faced sentencing. 6 months of federal prosecution had systematically dismantled every lie exposed, every fraud, and revealed the true scope of the conspiracy against me and countless other victims. Marcus had pleaded guilty to racketeering, fraud, identity theft, and witness tampering in exchange for a reduced sentence of 15 years in federal prison. Rebecca received 8 years for conspiracy and money laundering. Dr. Pemberton lost his medical license and received 5 years for his role in document fraud. The Morrison family's development empire was completely destroyed with assets seized to compensate victims of their decades-long fraud scheme. But the most satisfying moment came when Judge Patricia Williams addressed Marcus directly before imposing his sentence. She had reviewed every piece of evidence, every audio recording, every fraudulent document he had created. "Mr. Blackwood, you did not just steal property from your sister," Judge Williams said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute moral authority. "You attempted to steal her identity, her sanity, and her right to exist. You practiced mourning her death while she fought for her life, then tried to convince the world she was mentally ill when she survived to expose your crimes. This level of calculated cruelty toward family demonstrates a complete absence of human decency." The judge's words validated everything I had endured and confirmed that seeking justice had been worth every moment of pain and doubt. Marcus sat at the defendant's table, no longer the confident manipulator who had practiced fake grief in preparation for stealing my legacy. Prison had already changed him. He looked smaller, older, and utterly defeated. As court officers led him away in shackles, Marcus looked at me one final time. I expected anger, defiance, or perhaps a last attempt at manipulation. Instead, I saw something that surprised me: genuine remorse. Not for his crimes, but for losing the game he thought he had rigged in his favor. The civil proceedings that followed criminal sentencing restored everything Marcus had stolen and more. The cottage was officially returned to my ownership, along with all proceeds from the fraudulent sale plus interest and damages. Morrison Development's insurance company paid additional compensation for the emotional distress and property damage caused during their brief construction period. But money could not repair the most significant loss I had suffered: my faith in family connections. The discovery that Rebecca had been working against me from the beginning shattered assumptions about blood loyalty that had guided my entire life. Family, I learned, was not defined by shared genetics, but by shared values and genuine care for each other's well-being. That realization led me to something more valuable than any inheritance: chosen family. Agent Catherine Morrison had become a close friend during the investigation, bonding over our shared experience of fighting corruption and protecting vulnerable people. Sarah Kellerman evolved from attorney to mentor, teaching me about legal advocacy and inspiring me to pursue paralegal training so I could help other fraud victims. Most unexpectedly, Amanda's genuine remorse and efforts to make amends had eventually led to reconciliation. Her cooperation with the FBI had been crucial in securing convictions, and her willingness to testify about Marcus's manipulation tactics had helped expose the psychological abuse tactics he used against everyone around him. Forgiveness had been a process, but rebuilding our friendship had taught me about the difference between mistakes and malice. The cottage itself became something more meaningful than just property I had inherited. I transformed it into a retreat center for families recovering from financial fraud and elder abuse. Working with a nonprofit organization, Sarah helped me establish. We created programs to help other people navigate the legal system, understand their rights, and rebuild their lives after being victimized by family members or trusted individuals. The irony was perfect. The cottage Marcus had tried to steal and sell for development became a sanctuary dedicated to protecting other vulnerable people from exactly the kind of exploitation he had attempted. Every person we helped represented a victory over the cynical worldview that had driven his crimes. 6 months after the sentencing, I received a letter from Marcus in federal prison. He had apparently spent considerable time in reflection, and his letter contained what appeared to be a genuine apology for the pain he had caused. But reading his words, I realized that forgiveness was not something I owed him, regardless of his remorse. Some betrayals are too fundamental to overcome. Marcus had not just stolen my property, he had tried to steal my reality, my sanity, and my right to trust my own experiences. That level of violation created damage that extended beyond what any apology could repair. Instead of forgiveness, I chose something more powerful: indifference. Marcus no longer had the power to hurt me because I no longer gave him space in my emotional life. He had become simply a cautionary tale about what happens when greed overpowers family loyalty and basic human decency. Standing on the deck of my cottage on a crisp December evening, watching waves crash against the rocks that had witnessed 4 generations of my family's history, I felt something I never expected to experience again: complete peace. The property was truly mine. The people who had betrayed me faced appropriate consequences, and I had built new relationships based on mutual respect rather than biological obligation. The legal battle had cost me naive trust in family bonds, but it had given me something more valuable: confidence in my ability to fight for myself and others who faced similar betrayals. I had learned that justice might be delayed, but it was not denied to those willing to persist through manipulation, gaslighting, and seemingly impossible odds. As I finish sharing this story with you today, I want to ask, have you ever faced a situation where family loyalty conflicted with doing what was right? How do you balance forgiveness with accountability when someone you trusted betrays that trust in devastating ways? Your experiences and insights in the comments help all of us learn from each other's journeys through family drama and recovery. If this story of standing up to family betrayal resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more true stories about justice, karma, and the courage it takes to fight for what is right. Share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve better treatment from family members, and that seeking justice is not betrayal. It is self-respect. Thank you for listening to my story and supporting my journey from victim to survivor to advocate. Remember that your worth is not determined by how family treats you, but by how you choose to treat yourself. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept unacceptable behavior, even from people who share your DNA.